Okay, class. In this short video, I'm going to introduce to you and talk to you a little bit about the Maori culture. Now, keep in mind, I'm not an expert when it comes to the Maori, but a few things that we will talk about. We'll talk about how they got to New Zealand, how they reacted when the Europeans arrived, some of their better well-known parts of their culture, such as their haka dance and their tattoos, and so forth. Let's begin. All right, so let's start with their origins. Now, we've talked about how the Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. So they were the first people to arrive in the country of New Zealand, and therefore they are still there. Now, Maori means ordinary people in the Maori language. One thing that's pretty interesting about theirs is that in Maori, in their language, it means ordinary people. So that's something that's pretty cool. All right. Now, the Maori came to New Zealand about 1,200 years ago, and they were people who lived within the Polynesian Triangle. Remember, the Polynesian Triangle is this area here that I've just kind of circled. So in that triangle, which is right here, is where a lot of these Polynesian cultures came from. So it made up the population of the Maori. Now, many of these individuals explored many of the islands found here. Now, these people would island hop or go from island to island trying to find a place to settle. Because, keep in mind, there's not a lot of land between each islands, they would actually use ships or boats to kind of get them around the seas. Now, these guys were very skilled when it came to using the stars and the sun to help them figure out their location. They were very good seafarers. They were very good sea travelers. One thing that they used very well was this stick map, which shows us kind of this is a map that they would use to go from island to island. Each rock that you see essentially represents an island, and that's the type of map that they would use to help them navigate. So think of it as Google Maps 1,200 years ago. Now, when they finally did arrive on the island that is now known as New Zealand, the Maori named it Aotearoa, which typically means the land of the great white cloud. So the Maori named it Aotearoa, and that translates to land of the great white cloud. Here's just an image of the islands of New Zealand. Now, over time, these Maori developed culture, started hunting, started planting crops, and they developed their own culture, language, and many traditions. Like many indigenous tribes around the world, they also have their own religion. And within their religion, they believe in gods that represent the sky, the earth, and nature. And they have a lot of their own oral traditions, so stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, kind of telling how the sea created their people, their gods created the sea, created the sky, and created, well, their people as well. Now, and within their culture, it is also believed that the spirit of their ancestors can help them when they need it. So keep in mind, in referencing to the movie Moana, the grandmother's spirit helped Moana throughout the movie every now and then. So that's a belief that they have in this part of the world, that their ancestors are still helping them even though they've passed away. Now, let's focus on a little bit about the European arrival. Now, the Maori lived and controlled New Zealand for a very long time, and it wasn't until the English arrived in the 1700s. Now, we have talked about how James Cook kind of helped discover this area, and you also have an individual known as Abel Tasman that found this area. So these are two individuals that were very important to this. Now, over time, there were many conflicts between the Maori and the British over land control. The Maori being as they were there the longest, they were okay with sharing their land, but the British, wanting to find riches, gold, spices, and a lot of other riches, they wanted to keep everything. They wanted to control all of the land and name it for control of Great Britain, which is the opposite of how many indigenous cultures tend to think. Now, after many years of going back and forth, a lot of little mini conflicts, mini wars, they finally, the British and the Maori signed a treaty. And this treaty, which basically means it's an agreement to stop fighting, they agreed that they weren't going to fight each other anymore and they were going to come to an understanding. Now, this treaty was known as the Treaty of Waitanagi, and it was signed in 1840. This is an important date, so make sure you remember it. Down here, I have just a couple images. One image of them kind of going over the treaty and being represented by an English person and a Maori person. Over here is an actual copy of what is left of this treaty. So it's kind of neat that it's been around this long. Now, this treaty promised the Maori that they could keep their lands and they would be treated the same as British settlers. So it essentially gave them, in their eyes, with this treaty, things were going to get better and that they would both respect each other's cultures and differences. However, this treaty, although very effective, did not stop the fighting between the two groups of people. Even to this day, a lot of descendants of Maori are still fighting for what they believe their rights are, and so forth. And each image here these are political cartoons or images that kind of show the distrust between the two of them. And here it just says, honor the treaty. So once again, people are still kind of fighting for their rights, even to this day. Now, Maoris today, keep in mind, many they have not died out, and there are approximately 650,000 Maori in New Zealand today. And like most indigenous tribes, most have adopted a modern way of life. So they live their lives just like people that are non-Maori. Like they live in modern homes, use technology, speak the English, and so forth. However, many of them still speak their ancestral language, and because so many people speak Maori in New Zealand, it is the second official language of New Zealand. And one thing that is pretty cool about New Zealand is that people of the Maori culture or people of Maori descent are extremely respected within New Zealand because they realize that they were here first. They realize that many of them have ancestors that were from the Maori, so they have a great respect for them. Now, some of the Maori culture that we'll address, we'll talk first about the haka. And this is something that some of us have probably seen at some point or another, but the haka is a dance, and this dance is one of the most best-known traditions in the Maori culture. It is a ceremonial dance that is performed by stomping their feet, shouting, and making intimidating facial expressions. You can kind of see these guys. They look like they're stomping, and they have their tongues sticking out, and that's, once again, or a facial expression, and that's just an attempt to intimidate. Now, the dance back then, so we're talking when they were still fighting the British or fighting amongst themselves, the dance was used as a way to intimidate and show their strength in battle. However, now it's mainly used for special occasions or to kind of show some off their culture. Here you have an image of a more traditional haka, and these individuals are wearing clothes that they would have worn back then. You can kind of see the faces tattooed and so forth. But like I said, this is probably from a ceremony that they do. Alright, another dominant or very big part of their culture are tattoos. Now, many cultures found within the Polynesian Triangle tattoo themselves with very detailed tattoos. This art form is considered very sacred in the Maori culture, And in the Maori culture, it is actually known as a mako. And as you can see here on the right, you have different examples of different styles of tattoos. They either go on their arm, chest, they go on their leg. If you're very committed, it can go on your back. Some will even tattoo their face. Now, not so much, but back in the day, it was very common. Now, one thing that makes these different from regular tattoos is that every tattoo or each tattoo is different, having a specific meaning to the wearer. So no, it doesn't seem that two people have the same tattoo, because their tattoos are going to mean something different to everyone. Many people of Polynesian descent have these tattoos. It's something that's very common. And it has also been seen that women participate in tattooing themselves. Especially during ceremonies now, the tattoos aren't permanent, especially when it comes to those that are done on the face. But back in the day, back then, it was very common for women to also have their faces tattooed. Now, this is all that we will be talking about when it comes to the Maori. Once you are finished, be sure to double check and make sure that you have answered all the questions. Thank you.